Hello again. Okay, I will not comment on the film. We will have our guest to comment. Although the film may have many layers, I need to say something. It focuses mainly on the engage of individual or public intellectual, actually. And in my introduction, I want to say something about the story about the citizens as the situation is in the citizens as it is now, actually, and I will refer to the research we recently done with my colleague Gazela Puder-Graško, Igor and Pavlović, on the perception and attitudes of the citizens that showed actually the same picture as the most of the studies done in the recent years, and basically these are main findings. Citizen dissatisfaction with the quality of all aspects of life in Serbia is very high. The state is perceived as an entity completely detached from the requirements of citizens, whose basic needs, in fact, are unsatisfied. The state, as seen by citizens, does not care about the inaccessibility of health services, a discredited and ruined educational system, and high unemployment. In addition, citizens perceive the channels of social mobilization as inadequate and the criteria of social promotion as defective, while the people are seen as good. On the other hand, we have bad politicians who are responsible for poor living conditions. Society is most often described as tired of being worried and disappointed and therefore numb and passive. This prospect of a better future and overall trust in the prosperity of everyday life is almost completely absent. Citizens also perceive the politician as a group that cares only about themselves and their personal interests. The significant electoral abstinence due to a strong sense of impotence is a consequence of such negative attitude toward politics. A smaller portion of the citizens point to civic responsibility, criticizing the inertia, the vulnerability to manipulation of other fellow citizens. In addition, less educated citizens openly express a willingness to sell their vote. The majority of citizens do not actively follow politics, and there is a worrying trend to consider information from the media relating to politics as reliable. They read only the headlines in the print and internet media, while the daily newspaper are identified as the yellow press. If we take into consideration this perceived social and political atmosphere, it is not surprising that social engagement is almost completely absent. On the one hand, citizens strongly desire change to the system, and hypothetically, they would be willing to engage in order to contribute to the change. On the other, however, there is various obstacles that explain the lack of engagement, the apathy and passivity among citizens, the lack of accountability and responsiveness of the state, low political efficacy, the lack of knowledge of the mechanism of civic participation, as well as the lack of direct experience in participation in democratic civic practices. This social and political passivity, a very prominent feature among citizens, are actually the final results of the lack of the rules that should apply to everyone. A state of general insecurity and dissatisfaction has led to a sense of their own inadequacy, political efficiency, and finally paralysis of any kind of civic engagement. There is a kind of vicious circle of mistrust and stagnation in seeking democracy, but without a willingness to engage. We all know that, and these are the main results of our research. We all know that the loss of citizen confidence in traditional instruments of democracy is increasingly present in all developed democracies. In Serbia, we can find certain specificities, above all, of the underdeveloped democratic system and widespread civil passivity that arise after the mass participation in protests until 2000. Therefore, we think it's necessary actually to look at the alternative forms of social engagement that promote democratic potential and encourage the participation of citizens in the public sphere. This is why we actually invited our guest today. to discuss with them what are, in this situation of widespread delusion and passivity, the lessons we can learn from the past, but also for the new waves of citizens' mobilization we witnessed, about challenges and potentials of citizens' engagement for social change, and to ultimately try to at least approach the question, what is that we can do today in order to promote and engage in social change? Maybe we can start from the past, then I can, but we don't have any specific order, but yeah. Okay. Lilijana? I already present all the speakers.
I can introduce myself. Lilijana Čičkarić, it's research and scientific advisor in Institute of Social Sciences in Belgrade. And I'm very pleased that I can share just a few thoughts about the situation, what's going on now in our society, and what's happened and what was going on in 90s, especially in 90s, when I was, I can say, in my best years of my life, I can say, but it's just for fun, because every years are best. But when I was a student and on my graduations and after, I just had an opportunity to participate in many protests in Serbia in 91 and 92 and also 96, 97, and finally we had the 2000. And it was really turbulent times for all young generation, on the, many generations in all this period. And all that I can say, what is the difference between now and then, it's that nowadays we don't have that generational potential that we had before. Because many generations socialized in absolutely turbulent and very difficult circumstances. Especially in Serbia, you have seen in this film, it's very well documented what was going on in Serbia all these days. And after 2000, we also had just a few very, very specific political engagements, but first of all, I want to mention the assassination of the Prime Minister, and also after we just, as I remember, had maybe just a few situations that the real potential of citizens and possibility for any kind of social movements happened here in Serbia. And why is just like that? I have mentioned one reason. There is no degenerational conscience, I can say, or just a unique and generational thought, or something that happened in a sphere of social-cultural construction of society, and on two other reasons that are very important, and after I will give the word to the others. I think it's the situation that we, after maybe the economic crisis, the global economic crisis, we just found ourselves in a situation that the social democrat ideas and ideology was on a very low level, and it's not. It was just a kind of value vacuum that I think here it's very well occupied by a populist movement, and especially this party, which is on nowadays on the rule. It's the, as we know, the derivative from Radical Party. And they took advantage of this situation and very well capitalized the dissatisfaction of citizens in that moment. And the third, I can say the reason that the citizens are on a low level of political participation and possibility for engagement is that the situation globally and especially in Europe, it's and also in the east countries of Europe and also in West Europe, the situation is very difficult. As you know, also populists, nationalists, and many conservative parties and many conservative movements are on the stage, and in all these, I mean the global design, the global political order, it's nowadays that we are not so optimistic about the situation in here and everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilijana. Somebody wants to, yeah.
So what would be the question? I mean, we heard the report about Serbia, but I'm not going to speak about Serbia. Of course, I will, but as a guest in this country. So therefore, I don't think it makes sense only to localize this to Serbia. This film is about Serbia mostly. This film is giving narration that is particular, and Mila can tell us more about it. And just by watching this film, I'm having experience which is more post-Yugoslav and very intimate experience of several places, is that there are so many narrations that you can say. This is just one. And probably in this room, many people wouldn't agree. And what our friends who are coming here try maybe to figure out what was actually happening. And don't worry if you can't make a coherent narrative, no one can. And about exactly the same events, you're gonna get 10 totally different stories. And of course, this is not particular for anything special about Serbia. It's like that this almost everywhere in every society, where clearly there is a conflict of narratives, a conflict about how we understand history, and of course how we position ourselves ideologically, and what do we want to see in our society, what is the change we want to see. Strictly not from academic point of view, but maybe from literary point of view, it is interesting to see what is the role of your immediate environment, family, how this shapes you, how biographical details shape you, and how this will shape your idea about your society, your community, where do you act, for whom do you act, what about this transgenerational community where you are supposed to do something good for your society because this will be good for your children, and so on and so on. Of course, we live in a country where it's not yet clear what is the community, huh? What is the community? Where is the territory? Where the borders end? Many of us changed many communities, and after all, most of us were born in Yugoslavia, which had a different idea about community, and it was a socialist country, so it had a different idea about what community means, what means to be a citizen. And clearly not exactly the same like in liberal democracies, and especially complicated in the peripheries where we live. So I think although I was thinking not to speak about the film because this is not a panel about the film, but I don't know if we can. I mean, maybe some people prepare something, but I cannot really not to speak about film. And of course, I ask Mila here to speak not only as a filmmaker, but also as political scientist, because this is what she is as well. Therefore, someone who also belongs to the academic world, not only to the film world. It is... I think there there's a total confusion now. There's total confusion. And in the answers you are getting, and what we heard in the film, whom do you like, whom do you love, where you would like to live, what is good, what is bad, what is politics. And this is the moment we live right now, and the main character of the film, not to say your mom and so on, because that would be, is clearly expressing all doubts. I think this is very, very important about her own public engagement and what public engagement is. And then you could think if someone like that should say, well, basically, I don't know if it's worth it. So then why should anybody else do it? And also, if we are supposed to do it, as she's saying, you do it now, your generation, but what? Yeah? Of course, on the ironic side, we could say it was easier when there was someone like Milosevic, and then everybody could say, "Oh, I'm against him." The problem was when he was gone. Then you have to say, "Okay, I'm for this," or "I want to see this change." And this is where, of course, this opens up, like then and today, all sorts of ideas. How do we want to organize our society? And I think it's very extraordinarily strong. It creates a lot of frictions. It also creates a lot of animosities, and also it also put us in a position where we are supposed to act without fully understanding the political and social and economic situation we are in. And that situation is very full of so many contradictions, social and economic, ideological. We are all contradictory, in ourselves. I mean, this film also shows this. There's no purity. I mean, you want to show it, but you want to believe you are pure, but you are not. None of us is. You want to work, you want to go into institutions of your purity. You want to go to the street and fight for the beautiful world. Well, it's not happening in the vacuum. And after all, who is to blame? Who is to blame for the fall of socialism, which not many tears are shed in this film about that, but also who is to blame about fall of Yugoslavia? Many tears are shed about that, but these two processes are connected and cannot be separated. And who is then to blame why the so-called revolution did not turn out not to be a revolution? And are we going to blame previous generations for that, which is easy, or are we going to blame ourselves, or are we going to create a new combative citizen activist narrative for something, or are we going to copy what people do somewhere else? Are we going to look at France, or are we going to look at somewhere in the world where there's new subjectivities are formed, and then we're going to take this and put into our context? Well, it's not going to work, of course, because the context really determines everything. And unfortunately, my experience of this is that you can't really come out with the straight answers. Even when it comes to the post-Yugoslav sphere, where actually there are certain localities, and the logic of localities in every of now newly constituted states that will prevent you to just copycat tactics or strategies. And I don't think, now this is something for academics, theory can help. I'm totally disillusioned with theory. And also I'm disillusioned with people who think because they read Badiou or Zizek that they are activists. I find it utterly sad. And especially the theory of philosophy cannot give you the answers to what you have to do in your society. And I'm sorry to say this here, there's a lot of engaged people. There's a group of engagement studies, and it's all good and nice, but it won't help you create the world you want to see in your reality and in your lives. So on this positive note, I'll pass it.
Thank you very much, Igor. Mila, do you want to comment on? Because he also comments on. I would like to give the floor then to him, because he represents something he's doing, practice of engaged practices.
Sure. So I don't know, I always love listening to Igor talk because there's so much clarity to the way he expresses things, and it helps me formulate some things. Just to say, so when I began working on this film, what I thought I was doing was trying to find an alternative way to narrate our past, because it came from a personal frustration with, one, that what I lived through as growing up I've never seen told in films, and film is my medium of expression, so that was the one I was reaching for. But the second was this feeling that we have somehow grown up in a society that is so divided and has no consensus over its lived reality, that it has no consensus over the past either. And so there was just this feeling of, you know, historiography has failed us, and history obviously can only go so far. And perhaps because of this obsession of searching for the objective truths, you know, the kind of monolithic story of what happened, I began to feel that maybe the work that we need to undertake now lies not in the domain of history, but lies in the domain of memory. And memory permits us to enter into that field from a personal perspective. So there was very much this idea of to try and move that work from something that is official, documented, very, you know, to something that is felt, that was lived and felt and is very intimate. And from the very beginning, I had this idea of the title, of The Other Side of Everything, with this idea to try and say, and that's why for me the scene where we go to the other side of the apartment and we see Nada was so important, to say that in some ways there are no victors and losers in this history. There are only people whose lives have been completely shaped by historical and political forces beyond their control. And so there was just this feeling of maybe a space for dialogue can open in Serbia as well when we move away from the idea of a first Serbia, second Serbia, third Serbia, you know, my side of the door and your side of the door, and open a story that is a lot more nuanced about how all of us, you know, have had our lives shaped by politics. But that was where I started from, and my inspiration, and when you say I'm going to come at this from a literary perspective and not an academic one, is actually my inspiration for it was a novel. It's a very novelistic structure, I think, in the film. It was Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks. This whole idea of using a family chronicle that also illuminates you on the history, but it's very much in the background. It's not a film that had any idea to tell you the history, but to situate, you know, a family within kind of them. Oddly enough, that's not the film you saw. I mean, I think by now you all realize that's not the film you just saw, which was a surprise for me as well. But the beauty of making documentaries is, in the end, you have the writing happens in the editing room. In the end, I had 200 hours of material and maybe 120 hours of archive, and you begin a process which is very similar to that of a sculptor chiseling from marble. You're looking for what's in the material. You're not trying to impose the story onto the material. And what I found to be in the material was something that is actually much more related to the subject of your conference, which is I began to realize that the conversations I had had with my mother were not so much about history, but were a lot more about why on earth? I mean, what is it that pushes you to speak up? What is it that pushes you to engage? What is the price she paid for it? What is the price we paid for it? Was any of it worth anything? And I ended up making a film that's much more about the questions that are working inside me than some kind of theoretical, intellectual. The film came from here, just came from this, as you say beautifully, it's a confusion, you know, of what does any of that mean to do it, and what does it take in order to do it? And I tried to make a film that's incredibly honest, because where for me it took a lot of me to make that as naked and as obvious in the film, which is to say that, one, whatever it is that she has, I don't have it. If it's courage or something, I don't have it. I don't have the conviction, I don't have the ability, and it's this awful sense of you're being given a moral heritage that you're going to walk away from. And so I was trying to reckon with that in this film, to kind of accept the sadness of that, but that's what I was trying to do. And so I think it kind of really goes back to your question of engagement, essentially, you know, and for me this is a film that's very much of a mea culpa, just an awful process of self-realization that it's not a path I'm going to be able to take. I've lost, as Igor said, I studied political science. I was an activist all through my student years. I created a debate club, which we operated outside of the University of Belgrade because at the time it was forbidden by the university law to criticize the government within the university. I followed my mother in every demonstration she went to and every speech she held. And I'm one of those people who has had such a breakdown of political faith. I no longer believe in the language of politics. I do not believe in speeches. I do not believe in manifestos. I do not believe. So I was, and my loss of faith led me to discover a new form of communication, which is documentary film. In that sense, I was lucky. I found a language I believe in speaking, but political language, I do not believe in speaking anymore, and that's a kind of awful conclusion.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mila, very much. I think it is a good introduction to somebody who can say us, I hope, some different picture of mobilization of citizens. What can we do now? And
well, okay. Hi to everybody. My name is Robert. I'm here in front of the initiative "Don't Let Belgrade Drown." But before we go into whether there is a possibility for citizens' engagement, for me it's very difficult to just jump on that topic after watching the movie. I mean, in that way, of course, it's a very good movie in that way, and I will not speak as a film critic, which I'm not, of course. It's very multi-layered in that way, and that's one of the reasons where I have very ambivalent relation toward this movie. And let me try to go of telling why, and then we will maybe come to today's answers, how we can together mobilize for some political idea. In this movie, as you said, we are watching in a way family drama, where is that maybe two questions that everybody from our generations, and I think that we are all here who are sitting here, are born in Socialistic Federative Yugoslavia, so our country was destroyed in that way, so we witnessed it, and maybe, I mean, people have different relations towards that. But there are two particular questions. One is that what constitute a citizen, a professional who needs to act, who needs to state his opinion, and who needs to go in a public in order to take responsibility for a given word. And when we watch the main character, Bianca Turajlić, I mean, who is also a very public character, of course, outside of the movie, you have a great respect towards the definition of being professor, as she's saying. And I need to tell to make just one jump into 2016, when there was huge demonstrations near the town assembly, which was organized by the initiative Don't Let Belgrade Drown, but most of the citizens were mobilized because they had, I mean, they were so angry about one particular night when the whole part of the city was destroyed within the land of the particular megalomaniac project Belgrade Waterfront. Sorry for making this type of digression, but they were, I think most of them was angry because we all knew that we live in a country where it's totally possible to organize the demolition of the houses in a particular area in collusion with the police officials, and where you can detain passers-by and citizens, and police will not react and to protect them. So this is one part of the reasons why people also demonstrated. Then another part of the reasons, I think, are those that are in regard to the Belgrade Waterfront project, which is, I mean, just to portray it in one sentence, the use of public money in order to build a luxurious gated community in a Belgrade, where you will use public money to support somebody's private investment, in a city where you have people living in a part of the city where there doesn't have a proper sewerage system, for instance, or a drinkable water. So basically, one of the reasons is to fight against the social inequalities that are entrenched in the current politics in Serbia. So to go back, I mean, we invited, of course, Bianca OReilly to come to the protest and to speak. And then again, she demonstrated the role of professor. I remember when she was giving the speech, and then at one point she said, and to all of my colleagues, professors, and especially to the colleagues that are professors at the law faculty, you should consider how and what do you teach your students and why you're not here protesting. So basically, I mean, in the movie, we see really a good picture of what constitutes a professor as a public figure. And I think through the relation between the mother and the daughter, we see that question that we all have, I mean, to stay or to leave the country. And it's the question that, I mean, in my family very often was raised. And also, I think that throughout my whole life, I was always questioning whether this makes sense, whether should we all stay. And that's the very linked issue is to be moral in that way, to have courage to go in front of the people and state your opinion and tell if you think that something is wrong, and that you will face the possible consequences in our society. And that's the personal question that I think you are also asking yourself. So on that way, I mean, those are also something that everybody needs to give an answer if he or she thinks that the mobilization does make sense, that we can change something. But if we would, I mean, look on this movie and then go to the question of the history and what was Yugoslavia and whether it was a good project or not, and etc., and to relate to the communistic regime, then in that way, I mean, that would be disputed. I mean, we all see here, for instance, personal drama that is interlinked with the housing issue. But I really need to say that, by my personal opinion, the Yugoslavia after the Second World War was a very good modernistic project in that way, that wanted to transform the society in a country into from an agricultural into industrial country, and of course they wanted to transform society. So basically, if we would try to use the best practices that was in socialistic Yugoslavia, that would be the statement that the state should, allow resources everybody to have for education, have for healthcare, to have for social welfare, etc. And then that would be the positive influence of Yugoslavia in that way. And then I will go to the generation of Bianca OReilly, which is pretty much the generation of my parents. So basically, I think that everybody in the late 80s, 90s, in that way, they were fighting, at least my parents and as yours as well, fighting for what they would state a normal life, and what, of course, for them was a democratic society in that way. And of course, they were all angry that, of course, it went in other way into the armed dissolution of Yugoslavia, particularly, and we went into the national ethnic conflicts. And if I may, I will really make some small digression. I'm also, when I was looking the movie, always, seeing how, remembering something from my childhood. I come for mixed marriage, for instance, and I remember that, like in the beginning of the 90s, a man approached me at the street and totally confused me, because he asked me what is my nationality, and I said I'm a Yugoslav, and he then told me, no, you're not, that doesn't exist. And I was totally puzzled and confused. I ran away from the man, and then I asked my father, what happened and like who we are, and he was like insisting, you're Yugoslav, I mean, and always tell that. So basically, if the generation of our parents were fighting for a normal, consolidated democracy in that way, if we would look now, I mean, and especially after, as a representative of Initiative Don't Let Belgrade Drown, participating in local elections, I mean, I really believe that we don't have not even consolidated democracy, we don't have neither consolidated electoral democracy in that way. In a way, I mean, just look the media arena and look the unfair use of state resources in order to support the political elite that is in powers. So, but how we came to that, that is actually, I think, the answer of what happened from 2000 until now. And my belief is that we were always kind of stuck in those politics that was faced with how do you define being a Serb? Could you be Yugoslav and living in a Serbia? What is Serbia? What are our territories, etc.? And that was, in a way, something that was, I think, always forced in order to show us that that is actually the political issues. But I really think that the proper political issues is how we organize our life and what type of resources do you have in order to feel, to live a normal life. And then we see in the movie at one point that Bianca Turajlić is saying, well, of course, what did we expect? I mean, there were 1780s parties making the democratic opposition of Serbia. Of course, that they could not agree on the politics. But what really she is thinking, they could not agree on the, I mean, level of politics, which is this, what I said, symbolical, identical issues. But basically, they were all, in a way, imposing the same politics, which believed that if you, in a way, let market economy in every sphere, in that way, I mean, the progress will come. And of course, that's resulted, by my personal opinion, that contributed, I mean, also to having, especially the generation of our parents, and then our generation, not anymore believing that you can change anything through politics, because, I mean, neither you have a proper electoral democracy, and even now, everything in your life depends whether you are good with a political party in power that, in a way, always is privatizing resources. So, as I said, in 2014, we started mobilizing ourselves in order to oppose this huge waterfront project. As I said, to oppose to the concept of investor urbanism, where public funding is used to support very luxurious initiatives of non-transparent private entities, while at the same time, I mean, people cannot enter into the proper healthcare system when they are sick, or they could not use normal transport, or they even cannot go into proper schooling, for instance. So, and what we then saw that if I think you mobilize around something that people consider important, and if you mobilize in a way that everybody's voice is heard, that he or she has the sense that could influence something, that he is actually a political subject and not actually giving his vote to somebody else who is going to represent them, then, I mean, you will see that people can mobilize, and then other people, by my opinion, will join if they see a credible actor in that way. So to come, I mean, to this one, currently there is also a problem that people for righteous reasons, cannot see some actor who is in a way credible and to again, I mean, together with him try to change something. And I think that I'm not sure, but and neither do I know whether through different form of organization we could come to better solutions. But I think that we cannot expect good result if we are always with the same people striving for the same politics. I know that I didn't give an answer, but I mean,
there is no answer. But thank you very much. It's, yeah, it seems to me that yeah, of course, we expected this answer from you, and then. The main problem is that, as I saw, the research is saying that we have defeated citizens who does not believe. Of course, there is this chance that they will attack to the concrete everyday issues and then mobilize. On the other hand, we see that the role of public intellectuals is very important. So in that sense, your film is also a film that engaged. I was talking to a colleague in the toilet, and she said this film touched her, and she feel the need to engage. So this is also the effect you can provoke with this film. But I will stop and leave the floor to the public now to raise the questions. I suppose there are some questions.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question from someone who looks at Yugoslavia from the outside, who was also touched by this movie. By the way, congratulations to the author of for this excellent documentation. And I found it interesting because it also reflected my own kind of history of looking at Yugoslavia from the outside for the last 30 years almost. And at the end of this movie, there was a kind of episode, a dialogue between you and your mother, and your mother more or less asked you to take over. And you kind of then express your difficulties, that you do not know how to become active, that you need to find a voice. And I understand from that you do not mean this as something personal, but that you would like to generalize this. And also from the data that we heard from Irena, it seems to be a common problem of this generation, that you have lost trust and that you have difficulties actually to become politically active and to mobilize. So I just want to understand whether this impression is true that I got from this, and also if you have these difficulties, what are these difficulties? Would you say that this is something specific to Serbia, or is this something that you share with your generation also in other parts of Europe? And I see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who belong to this generation in the panel.
Can we? There was another question. So can we take 2 questions and then try to? Thank you. Somebody, yeah. Okay. Okay. Nothing else.
The irony of that conversation is that it was caused by you. So we were having the conversation because she was invited by Nedavimo Belgrade to hold a speech, and I was invited. And I was invited by them to hold the speech. She said yes, I said no. I'd never done it before, I was too scared, I didn't know what to say, all these things. Even though I was there with her every day protesting, but I said no. And that's, so thanks to you, there is this scene. And it was very much tied into, I mean, she kind of turns the tables on me. And for the whole film, I'm harassing her, trying to understand something. And in the end, she turns the table and she's like, and now your turn. If I have a hesitation, and I found what you were saying about mobilization very interesting, because from what I remember of the 90s, when the issue is clear enough, when it's precise enough, as what provoked the I feel it's not that hard to mobilize, actually. It's hard to spread the information, but I don't feel it's that hard to mobilize. For me, the difficulty began, and I can tell you the exact day when I lost my political faith. And it was on the 5th of October 2001. It was the first anniversary of our revolution. And Otpor held a huge congress in Dom Sindikata in Belgrade. And during that Congress, which was supposed to be like this triumphant moment, 1 year after the revolution, where are we now? What have we achieved? It descended into a really unpleasant argument. So, 1,500 people in a hall arguing, because there were only two ways forward. One was we stay pure, untouched, undirtied by politics. We remain this critical exterior watchdog over the process, and we kind of try and raise and flag issues, but we remain pure and true to the idea of resistance. Or the movement becomes a political party, and hence it enters into the actual political sphere. And all of a sudden you began to see, among the leadership of Otpor, two completely different conceptions of the way to go forward. And to the point where the ones who wanted to go into politics, you begin already to suspect them of always having had these political ambitions, and they were using this movement in order to build their careers. Immediately, it's kind of instinctively, you begin to change your perception of them. And on the other hand, you have people who want to remain so pure to the idea that essentially they will be irrelevant to the continuation of the process. And I remember I was 21 years old watching them, and suddenly it's like this crevasse opened in my perception of political engagement, because neither ways were things that I could recognize myself in. And all of a sudden it really began, I really had this moment of, if I don't believe in either, where is my place in political engagement? So I can tell you exactly what it is that prevents me personally, for example, for engaging. Because, and I think in some strange way that's the situation that the movement is facing now, because you either have to say we're going into politics, we're becoming a party, and we're accepting all of the dirtiness that the compromises, the political games, will entail, or we remain incredibly pure. But how does that transform into something effective? And so, and there's a wonderful, in Varoufakis's book, is it Adults at the Table? Adults in the Room. Adults in the Room. There's a prologue to the book where he's describing having drinks in a bar in Washington with some American official, I think it's maybe the Secretary of the Treasury or somebody, doesn't matter, but they're having drinks in a bar in Washington Hotel, and this guy says to him, there are two ways forward. You will either always be the independent voice who can be critical of the process, who's kind of above and external to the dirtiness of what's happening, and you will never be part of the actual conversation, and you will never be in the place where decisions are made. Or you can enter the room, you can sit at the table where the information is circulating, where the decisions are made, where the power is held, but then you enter the game and then you can no longer speak of what's really going on. It's either or. And I think he puts it so clearly in the book that I started thinking, and I can't find my place in either of those two positions. I don't see my place in either. So where do you go from there?
Films. Yeah.
Now I do a question. Thank you for the film, and the first thing I want to say is that this film made me suffering, and so I think this is very important to say, because the years are really recent. And so, for example, in Italy, the last revolution was in 1968, so it's not far, but it's distance. Here is very recent, and so I think it's very important to feel this suffering. And also, I have a question. I think the film is also on the present, because one of the main characters of the movie is the nationalism, this feeling, this ghost, this, it's not a ghost, it's a reality, but it's so strong, this feeling to this party, the nationalism. So I want to ask, in the past and now, in the present, so I want to ask to you, why, in your opinion, it is so appealing, so strong, feeling to belong to a nation, to be Serbian, to be Italian, to be Austrian, I don't know. Because it's really appealing. It's so, there is something, I think, true in this feeling that we have to understand better, maybe, to fight with him. Yeah.
No, it can work.
Okay.
That's a perfect question for him.
I was. Can you
Yeah. What do you think is so strong in nationalism? Well, because I think sometimes we think it's. For example, Pasolini say that fascists are our stupid brothers, but maybe there are something in these feelings which is very important and strong, and for example, myth, symbol, emotions. I don't know. So because this is the main. This is something which is in the past, in the recent past, but then arrive now in the present.
I think it honestly has to do with narrative. I honestly think it has to do with narrative, that you are told a story. I think that in Serbia it's very clear we're a country without a narrative, which means we're a country without an identity. I think the connection between the two is so strong. The story you are told is how you formulate your own identity. And in a previous film I made called Cinema Comunisto, what I was trying to do was look at how the Yugoslav story was told, and hence the Yugoslav identity was formed. You know, so for me it's really a question of, particularly in these shifting times, having a story that, you know, a perception of the world that is narrated to you and in which reflects how you then narrate the world to yourself is everything. I really think that. It has a lot to do with maybe this kind of postmodern condition. I have no idea, but I honestly think for me it's that simple. Nationalism has a story, an origin story, you know, you, the others, and so on. And so for me, nationalism is not that difficult to figure out. It's with populism that I think we have a bigger fight to fight.
Mm-hmm. It all depends what you can politicize and make it into a narrative. I mean, there was for 150 years very important narrative around class. Yeah, it's a class struggle. It's not out there nations fighting each other. It's a classes, no. So the goal is to get to classless society. Yeah, that would be the goal, and people died en masse for this ideal. Yeah? It seems that people coming from that tradition underestimated the power of nationalism. It is still with us, and it's becoming very, very strong, especially where you can politicize ethnic identities, even more so if it's connected with the religious identity. So we live this here, as you all know. But in this film, you saw it that these narratives change, and they change very quickly. Who are we? What is your ethnic background? What is your religion? What is your language? How do you call your language? Like, we live this in a succession of 60, 70 years, like 3, 4, I mean, basically, within one life, you change so many countries, so many narratives about yourself, so many self-perceptions. It wasn't the same thing to be citizen of socialist Yugoslavia, traveling abroad with a red passport, and believing, as Bianca says, that it will never end. It was different. And then how quickly people replace this narrative with the new one, which was ethnic nationalism, which is still the most powerful one, that is offering incoherent narratives. As academics would say, this is complete nonsense, it's bullshit, what you are selling to people, but somehow it works. And even people would kill for it. This process, of course, there have been a lot of, I mean, we are still... Maybe some people coming outside of the story will see in this film a certain attempt to make sense of what actually happened. So we still don't have answers. When people are sitting around the table and then they're trying to find the moment when Yugoslavia disappeared or broke up, or when the socialism was over, and what happened, and there is this moment of this Slovenian comrade saying to Milosevic, be aware what you are doing. Of course, Milosevic knows what he's doing. The Slovenian colleague does not know what's happening. And so basically he's appealing to him to say, hey, this is going to take us very, very, very far. I'm also, when I'm teaching about Yugoslavia, it's very difficult to explain it. So if anybody had narratives about horrible totalitarianism after, behind the Iron Curtain, well, it won't help you much to understand what was happening in Yugoslavia. Neither will help you to make sense out of its disintegration. After all, we see in the film the main character is trying to make sense also, but it's also problematic and complex and confusing. How to make sense? How was the first Yugoslavia created? What happened then? What was communism? What happened with this apartment? What happened then after all this? What people wanted? Yeah. The problem, of course, I don't know. I've been often asked this question. Yeah. And I think we are all thinking about that. Should we all do performative action and simply stop responding when people ask us where are we from? Simply stop saying that. Don't say I don't know where you come from, but whatever. Don't say I come from that or that country. Don't say it. Say, you know, I don't know. Ask me concrete questions. Don't ask me my passport or whatever. Don't ask me about my background and so on. I tried this game many times, and it's very confusing for people. They ask me where I'm from. Okay, it's a bit complicated in my case, but then I continue and making it, and that's a bit difficult. People want some kind of answers, and very often it's like, tell us your religious background or ethnic background or you know, of your parents, and then of your grandparents, and so on. You mentioned today I come from a mixed marriage, which is a very, very funny construction, but it's been imposed on you, of course. Imposed on us, mixed marriage. What does it really mean? And it's a funny thing that, you know, people have in mind either religious or ethnic belonging immediately. You don't need to say it. It's already part of that. Whereas, for instance, I have class idea. So, you know, kind of, my father and my mother, they were class enemies. Yeah, class enemies. My father would be much closer to what your mother, part of class position of your mother or her family, and my mother's family would be much more to the position of people who fought for socialism, because that meant education, health, social mobility, something that's been denied to them by my fatherly predecessors, yeah? Who were merchants, who were basically exploiting them to build their lovely houses and so on. So, and when my father was complaining to my grandmother, maternal grandmother, oh, communists came and then they took everything from us, she said to him, and she was a woman, almost illiterate from Dalmatia, who went through the revolution and concentration camps, and she explained him socialism. She said to him, well, they took from you to give to us. That's how it works. Yeah. And so you see, I myself, you know, when people very often, because my wife comes from Serbia and I come from Bosnia and Croatia, so they say, oh, different countries, and also enemies in the war, how do you make it? Yeah, which is a very funny question. Well, I often say, well, actually it's not. I mean, I would like to be very exotic, and I would like my son to be exotic, but he's not. We married into exactly the same class, exactly the same. So basically it's very incestuous, no? They marry in the same things, like people do, you know, in arranged marriages and so on. It's the same class that came out of socialism, what we used to call red bourgeoisie. So this is what I did. So, you know, this is where the whole conception falls apart. But this is performative, what I'm saying. Yeah? It's performative, it's artistic. Again, without serious impact on the reality.
Okay, Jelena Gazela, and then I have some questions, and then we will need to...
Thank you very much. I watched the movie for the second time, and it was I was again struck by it. I wanted to give two comments, basically. One was referring to this nationalism question and what you said. I think it's really, if you are lucky to travel, and I mean you are lucky to travel today, at least far distance, and when you go, for example, to Far East, it doesn't mean anything that you say where are you coming from, really anything. I mean, if you say Serbia, they don't know. If you say Yugoslavia, they don't know either. So if you have to say Europe. And that's really, you see how everything is relative, basically, and how would be, maybe we would be all luckier if people are able to travel and see how everything is relative. But never mind. I wanted to ask something else. Yesterday we had a panel about '68, and the persons who were like participants of the events back there said that they didn't have fear back then. They were simply doing the things. They were young, of course, but they were like just doing the things. And they had somehow idea to fight for. They had some vision of, and that part of some democracy which should come or something. And maybe we could say the same for 91. Maybe we could say something for 96 and even 2000. But all these results which Irena presented say that somehow it's not only fear, which we are like constantly getting as a response that people are like afraid a little bit to engage themselves, but it's also maybe something that they don't know for what to engage. Is there any vision behind that can help them to engage as maybe past generations did have? And I would just like to hear brief comments from you, maybe from Kozma, who is engaging for the moment, and also from other. Do you think that that is something which is maybe the biggest problem of very low engagement for the moment in some way today?
I would use this it's just okay because mine is also.
Yeah. Firstly, I wanted to ask something completely else. I mean, I wanted to pick up on different topics and to maybe make a not so coherent comment, but then Gazelle inspired me because I also wanted to say something that kind of follows of what she just asked. Is just that one of you said that it was easier during the 90s because people had Milosevic to fight against, so we could say that today we have Vučić to fight against, but the other difference was that it was kind of clear that we have to if we get rid of Milosevic, then we'll be just like other liberal democratic countries in Western Europe, and they were doing fine in the 90s. That was okay. We kind of more or less agreed to what would be the ideal we're striving for. Today, it's a bit more chaotic because not only that everything's falling apart, we lack these visions, but also we increasingly are becoming aware of how no, I wouldn't even say that we're on semi-periphery, I would say we're on periphery of everything. So people are, this is one of the topics in the movies, like how family narratives, personal narratives, and emerging historical narratives produce individuals who are kind of becoming aware of how everything is influenced by politics, history, and how political and historical circumstances shape us, shape everything, and shape our lives and our histories. And to be this critical and cautious towards any kind of engagement, whether academic or political, then connects us to what you've said, the results of your research, where people feel disengaged. Not only, I mean, it's funny because they don't want to be engaged, they're apathetic. It ironically and funnily enough actually reflects the real position. They are detached from politics. It's like the events have proven them that they cannot do anything to change. So we are now in a position where we have this consciousness that we are influenced by the external circumstances, and if we want to build a movement, whether political or if we want to do something academically, we have this as a burden. Like we have this truth of being in a periphery and that external conditions shape us, and we have to do something with that burden. I think that our predecessors didn't have to work with that. So it's kind of a thing that, well, it's there, and we need to turn it into something, we have to work something with that. Right?
Is this Jelena? Did you finish? I just want to add to Gazela's and Jelena's and ask Lilijana also, because she studies the movement, all the movements, and to give us this comparative perspective, what were the differences in potential and also in circumstances. What is your opinion on that? And then, yeah, this is just the adding.
I just want to say it's very important to talk about this message on the end on the film, in the film, because I think that we are dealing here in our society with some kind of depolitization. It's a very sharp and very deep process. Which is going on, I think, from 2000 till now, and it's very important because in this process, the problem is that all political institutions are, I can say, some kind of mimicry. Because we are dealing now with parliament, but it's not functioning like parliament. We are dealing with electoral system, but it's not functioning on a real, democratic electoral system. Also, we are dealing with political parties, but there are no parties. We have the only one party, and it's the main figure of all political, the leader of the party, which is questioning and answering all he knows all the questions and all answers, and he just paralyzed all institutions in the country. And that's the problem, because all the time we just have some kind of parapolitical process, it's and the other very, very, very dangerous process, it's some kind of, the level of political level, it's just narrowed on the individual level, because we don't have citizens, we don't have collective, we don't have the generational or any kind of movement, any kind of engagement on citizens level. We just have a reduced, or the political system we are dealing now is reduced on the personal level. For instance, we have always, when we have some problem with economic or never mind social problem, always it's reduced on personal level, because always one figure, one person, it's how we say žrtveno jagnje, or how we say it. Yeah, because that's the mechanism for just depolitization of the citizens, depolitizations of the people, of the engagement potential. And now we are in this situation that young people, people that are I think that if we are talking about the movement, the process of making social movements, we always have to in mind three things. It's time, history, and social and cultural context. And now these people, young people, they are dealing with just the deconstruction of history, the construction of social, economic, and situation, and also just ahead. I think it's not just a problem of our generation, but there is no future, and there is no any kind of trust in possibility to make better life or to make something for the other people. And also, just I want to mention the other thing also. That's the difference between this time and the past, especially 90s. When we have the the flourishing of NGOs and civil society here in Serbia that we had never before. And now, in this time, these days, we just have some kind of, you know, the collaboration, the clientelism or something that, you know, NGOs and the government and the political parties, they are all in some kind of, you know, a deal, what I can say. It's some kind of, you know, and that's the main reason for that depolitization. Nobody see the way how to fix their personal problems and how to fix their life in those, I mean, very, very, it's difficult to just to deconstruct that that situation, that system that we are dealing now in Serbia. And I think that the key factor that situation is like we have now. It's not optimistic, but what I can say, it's real.
Thank you. I think, yeah, you took a lot of notes.
Well, I always took lots of notes. It doesn't mean that it has some sense. I mean, in that way. So, to try to have quickly several short comments. I wanted to respond to Mila's comparison with the 90s, but Jelena already told the context in that way is different. And in the 90s, I mean, if you would ask people for what they are fighting for, of course, even there probably you would see the division between those who are fighting against the regime of Slobodan Milošević because he lost the wars, and those who were fighting for the concept of democratic state, you know, as they consider a normal life, which, as Jelena said, was not questioned. I mean, at that point, you would always have that notion that, like, look Hungary, look Poland, look Czech Republic. I mean, they were worse than us on a matter of living conditions, and now they're living better. So in that way, once we take down the Milošević regime, we are going to be the same. And that was also something that was characteristic even in academic works in that way. So basically, if you would look the literature on democratic transition in the 90s, most of that literature, and in the 90s and also until the mid of 2000s, never questioned the point B. The point B where you should come once you implement these types of policies. While now, if you would look on the works of the current scholars, you would see how now somebody who is interested in democratic transition first will reflect on the works of their elder scholars on democracy. And here we should look in order to answer these questions as well. So, and then to try to make short comment to Gazela questions, I need to throw back the question to Irena in that way. So, are people in your research asked about their vision of society and what would? Yes, okay. So then I mean, you now this. Okay, we can talk about that later, but. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and now I will go into reflecting, probably making having no sense because you have a proper evidence or research. So basically, I have problem with speaking about citizens and people that they lack vision, but very often they are not even asked about what they want. So in that way, I think that if through that dialogue we would come to the vision of their just society in that way, and also to go back to the reason of this debate, citizens do not want to mobilize anymore, and etc., etc. Well, once I studied political science, so I read something about the revolution of 1968. There was a common place to tell students they don't think about the politics. I mean, they're not interested in anything. And then you had 1968. So very often the way we look or the angle from where we look is not a good angle. So, and by my experience, yes, people are most often fed up with the politics, and that is a problematic thing because very often people and ordinary citizens would think of politics as some politicians fighting for their particular interest, and yes, you need to be dirty if you want to go into the politics, but that's the problem. I mean, those politicians fighting for particular interest actually influenced us to think of politics as something dirty in order to leave them, I mean, a position so they could actually go for their particular interest in that way. So, and now, by my experience, if you would try to do something on a local level, where citizens directly see that he has some type of influence, then you would see people are in position to organize themselves, and we see that throughout the whole Belgrade. I mean, in last year, we saw lots of different citizens' initiatives in New Belgrade fighting in order to preserve the last green area in their neighborhood, or for other types of reason. And somebody now, you often have people saying, well, that's not politics. I mean, by my opinion, yes, that is politics, and especially it's a good method to get back people of actually then go further and go into the real politics, because if we want to live in that just normal society, we really need to have that attitude. I will go publicly, I will enter the dialogue with my neighbors, and I will stand behind my idea and my words. Without that, we will go again in these types of debates where we will speak about citizens that are passive and not mobilized.
Thank you very much. We must close because technicians are here. I must say that I'm personally very happy that this was the closing speech because it's optimistic, and I totally agree. And I don't have any more time, so thank you all very much, our guests and public.